All right, everybody, welcome back again. Thank you guys so much for being here, and good afternoon to everybody. It's April the 6th, Monday. This is for Cal State Fullerton, Critical Thinking, Philosophy 105. This is our Monday, Wednesday section, 1 to 2:15 p.m. So welcome back, everybody. Hope you all had a really good spring break. I hope you guys are doing well, being healthy and safe. And got a little bit of time off to just rest and recover as we get to the last part of our semester here. So, we have a few minutes until it's 1 p.m., but to those that are already showing up, thank you guys for being here. Hi, Eduardo. Hi, everybody. I'm glad to see that you guys are doing well, and we're just going to get through our notes for today and then see what happens. I have a few announcements to make. Iced tea. A few announcements to make concerning, some messages that I delivered earlier by Titanium. So we'll be all clear on that. Maybe I should do this. I'll pull up the announcement in my phone so I can just read it over to you guys when the class period starts up. Cool, great to see everybody. Nice, everyone. Just going to hang in there for a few minutes until we get to our class hour. Okay. Good. Well, I hope you guys are doing well, and we're all going through a very unique semester. Me as your professor, you as a student. I can really only imagine what it would be like had I been going through college at this time. You have all this newfound independence. A lot of you moving away from your, family home to attend school, to go for your higher education. And it's definitely disruptive being either back at home or, kind of disconnected from the campus environment and stuff. But we're all here to support each other and help you guys out. And if there's ever anything at all, as we're continuing through this semester, if anyone has questions, concerns, anything they need or want, just always feel free to let me know. Also, this is an option for anybody that ever wants to do it, but if there's any student that ever wants to have the equivalent of like an office hour face-to-face meeting, you can always just set that up with me by appointment through email, and we can do like a Skype video call for any student that wants to do that. I've been doing that with some other students by request, and I'm always willing to try and make as much time as you guys need. So just understand that you might not have any need for a office hour type interaction, but if you do, certainly willing to provide it, and you would just have to ask me over email, and then we can set up a time for a Skype call if that's what you ever want to do. Sometimes that's useful. Other than that, we've always got our email interactions and these live streams where we can get back and forth, a little bit of engagement. So just a few seconds left until it's the 1 o'clock hour, and then I guess I'll just go ahead and start talking to you guys about some important little details in the class. Okay, well, we're approximately 1 p.m. So to everybody here watching, welcome back to Critical Thinking. And as I said, hopefully y'all had a nice, happy, and relaxing spring break. There's all kinds of things going on now with the crisis and stuff, but for the most part, I haven't seen too many people I know that have been significantly impacted in a negative way, and I'm hoping that you guys are in the same camp. But either way, we're all in this together. So welcome back. It's Monday, April the 6th. So I see that we've got a certain number of people here getting into the live stream. Welcome to you guys. Let me ask a quick question. Has anyone noticed that I mailed out a message today through Titanium to the class? Can anybody just confirm that you got the receipt of the message so I can establish that everyone's got it, and then I'll go over that really quick so that we're all on the same page with the Titanium announcement. Okay, Peter, Eduardo, others, Kayla, Hello, everybody, by the way. Good to see you guys. Yes, so I did send that message just earlier today. A couple of things are in it. So thank you guys for the feedback and helping me see that everyone got the message. Here's what the message says. I'll just read over a lot of it since I'm looking at it here on my cell. All right, so it says, "Dear students, hello. I hope you're all doing great and staying healthy. This message will provide the answer key for the second quiz." So one thing that was important in that email is that it has the answer key. So if you want to calculate your score for quiz 2, you could easily do that by comparing the answers you submitted to the answer key, which is provided in this email. For each answer that you gave, which is different from what was put in the answer key, there would be -3. If you don't have any deductions, then you've got 17 times 3, 51 points over 50. A lot of people did pretty well, but your own score is what you care most about, so you can definitely determine it just using this answer key. And there are also little one-sentence explanations for why each answer was that answer. So that's what it says. And then I just noted also that I've graded all the quizzes, so they've all been graded and fully finished. If anybody's not clear as to what their score actually is, in light of this, hey, Karina, Priscilla, and everybody else saying hello, good to see you guys. What I was just trying to say is that if there's any student that didn't have clarity as to what their score was, then it's fine to email me and ask for the score. If you want, you can send me that message anytime, but it's also possible for you to have a clear understanding just using the key. So I give you either option. Next up, it just says this: I'm including the instructions for the third homework assignment, which I'm making due in 1 week. Okay, so slight change to the syllabus that had to be made because of all of the change in the class with the coronavirus. So what was originally intended was that there would be an in-class group activity which would serve as the third assignment. That would have been this Wednesday. But clearly we don't have face-to-face meetings and there will not be a group exercise of that kind. So I have to change that and also delay it by 1 weekend to accommodate the pushback of some of our earlier meetings. So in other words, do note that the due date of the third homework assignment is 1 week from today. So you're going to just email me that submission at any time before 1 p.m. of the 13th. And the nature of the assignment is this. So I'm reading from the message. It says the original plan for the assignment was a group work activity in which the groups would work together to find advertisements that contain the fallacies that we studied. So actually what I've done in the past with this assignment is I would ask every student to bring in some type of magazine which contains printed advertisements in the pages. And the students would then all be placed in groups like we did earlier in the semester. And you and your team group members would find as many examples of fallacies in the advertisements in the collected magazine materials that you all would have brought in. So that was going to be collaborative, in class, hands-on, taking the advertisements out, and then stapling them together and attaching a sheet where all the group members would write their names and would give the reasons why the fallacies were seen in the provided materials to me. But anyway, we are not going to have a face-to-face meeting and groups, and certainly we're not going to have the different group members sharing magazines that they will then remove things from. But I want the assignment to mostly be the same. So here's how it has been changed. First thing is it's due next Monday instead of the originally designated Wednesday of this week. And then it says here, the original plan was a group work activity in which the groups would work together to find advertisements that contain the fallacies that we've studied. But now that we don't have face-to-face meetings, this will be done as an individual homework assignment. One common source of fallacious argument is seen in advertising and marketing materials. So here's your assignment. You have to find examples of advertisements that contain fallacies. Either printed, if you have magazines like fashion magazines and stuff like that have like full page color glossy ads and stuff, whether it's for cars, clothes, goods, services, products, whatever, food. That's one good source of printed advertisements that you can use to help complete the assignment. If you are able to find digital advertisements, then that would be acceptable as well, given that this is a homework thing now and it's not just that you're in class with physical magazines limiting you. You can go out into the web or wherever and find images that you can then attach in a file with your homework submission. So I'm just telling you that the ads that you're going to use for completing the assignment can be of either the printed paper kind or some digital stuff. In either case, whether it's printed or placed in a digital format, you have to capture an image of it and then compile the images of a set of them, as many as 20, one each for each of the fallacies mentioned in our book. So it says here, I need you to send me an attached file that contains images of the ads that you found. Give also a document that clearly labels and designates which fallacies were seen in the file containing the images of the ads, as well as a one-sentence explanation. So you have to find examples of advertisements that contain fallacies, either printed in a magazine, for example, or digital, like an online advertisement, and collect 20 of them, one for each of the 20 fallacies that we have studied. You then have to say what fallacy is seen in the ad and give a one-sentence explanation of why that is the fallacy that the ad commits. Okay? So you're basically going to supply me with two documents when you turn this homework in. One is going to be just the file which has all the ads with the fallacies that you saw. And so that's going to be basically like 20 advertisements. Then you're going to have like a document attached with it or in a separate file, which just says a one-sentence reason for each of the listed examples why you thought it did have that fallacy. Okay, so make sure that it's easy for me, the grader, to associate the images in the image file with the explanations and descriptions in the written document. That's all. So for just submitting the assignment, you'll get 60 out of 100 points, okay? For each correctly stated example of a fallacy, you'll get 2 points. So if you have 20 correct examples, 20 times 2 is 40, plus the 60 points for submitting it, that would bring you to 100 points. Perfect for this assignment. That's possible to do. But it says here, if you have 20 correct examples, you will add 40 points to the 60 for a total of 100. If I judge that the fallacy you mentioned is not seen in the ad or is not clear, then I could give you either 0 or 1 point on the example instead of 2. So deductions would happen either because you didn't give me 20 examples or because out of the examples that you did give, however many there are, that they didn't really seem to me to be fair examples of that concept of the fallacy. So it's in your best interest to make sure that you don't, provide something that's wishy-washy or ambiguous as to whether it counts as that type of fallacy or not. Try to get the clearest examples that you can to get your maximum points. So it says, if I judge the fallacy is not seen or is not clear, I could give you 0 or 1 point in the example instead of 2. Also note that you may not use a fallacy twice, okay? So you can't like turn in 20 examples of the naturalistic fallacy or something. No. Once you get one example and you clearly state why it's in that ad, then you have to move on to another category or another case, a different fallacy. So one fallacy per ad, and no double counting. So that's the rule. It says, the last thing I want to mention is that since Wednesday would have been a class period where the class was working in groups and it was not designed as a lecture day, I'm going to substitute for that by providing you guys with some video clips on digital literacy that sometimes I've shown in this part of the class. So instead of our typical Wednesday face-to-face, well, not face-to-face, but live stream meeting like what we are doing right now, this Wednesday I have some viewing materials for you, and we will think of that as a video day. Then we'll resume with these web streams next Monday when you have returned your third homework assignment to me, and then we'll be on to another chapter, which is chapter 12, and that has to do with science. Okay, so just some quick updates to you guys, and then at the bottom it just shows the answer key. So hopefully that's all clear to you, and if anything didn't sound clear or there's some more elaboration or explanation you want, definitely feel free to email me, and I can review it with you. But the instructions have been given in the titanium message that I delivered, and I did want to take the opening part of today's meeting to just kind of discuss it with you so that you have a pretty clear idea. So anyone have a question about this or anything related to it for me for now? If so, at any time, go ahead and type it in and I'll see it. If not, I'll see that too, and I'll just continue through the lecture, all right? So we next want to talk a little bit about something that's actually quite important to your homework, and that is how to bring critical thinking to the way that we interpret and analyze information and messages that we see in the media. So we're going to talk a little bit today about mass media and advertising. Okay, media and advertising. So I'm going to start by talking about some of the topics in Chapter 11. Even though the book has Chapter 10 being the chapter that discusses analyzing advertising, and then Chapter 11 is where it discusses mass media and the internet. I kind of think that the order should have been reversed because you kind of have to know a little bit about the media itself before you start discussing a more specific topic about it, which is advertising and marketing. So I'm going to go over some of the more important things that I saw in Chapter 11, and then we'll talk about the summary of some of the notes of Chapter 10 too. And that's all listed in the syllabus, the relevant pages and materials that you'd want to look at. Okay, so good critical thinking skills, among all the other things that they help us to be good at and to do well at, is to be able to analyze and interpret messages that we find in the media and in advertising and marketing materials. So for us to bring the skills of critical thinking to the way we assess information that's presented in the media, whether that's print media, digital media, radio, internet, or whatever, we have to be able to, first of all, understand the history of the media a little bit, know what it is, know how there are sometimes misleading messages that are conveyed either in consumer information or in news media sources. So we'll talk about the history of media in the United States, learn a little bit about the dependency of mass media on advertising dollars and money, develop skills for critically evaluating news reports, and examine the influence of the government on media information. Also, we'll talk about the impact of the internet in terms of a source of media. So mass media in the United States. Think about this, and this is a stunning fact, but we take in so much media every single day as American citizens, and really just the global community, same. But particularly in the Western world, we consume a lot of media. How many hours do you think in a given day the average American will spend viewing media of some kind? And media is being defined very broadly as television, phone, internet, traditional print media. So like how many hours of a day do you think you're spending looking at a screen or a book or listening to the radio? You'd be surprised to know that it's a very big number. And this was before the pandemic. So I think that now that we're in this pandemic, everybody quarantined, it's almost got to be a bigger number. So yeah, let me look at the statistic here. It's quite incredible. The average American, written here in the book, we live in an information age in which we are bombarded daily with an overwhelming amount of data. The average American spends about 9 hours a day watching television, surfing the internet, using their smartphone, reading the newspaper and magazines or other form of media. So there was a good guess there I saw where you put 12 hours. It wasn't that bad. I mean, it's actually 9 hours, statistically average, 9 hours. That was prior to the pandemic. And so, I mean, it's definitely a lot of your waking life. Even right now, you're looking at a media-based provision of information coming to you digitally. So we're like awash in media, messages, and information. It's inescapable, and it has a large influence on us as individuals and as consumers and as a society. So we want to know how these media messages and information can shape our viewpoint. Sometimes they can be misleading in order to give ourselves the best ability to go out in the world and to not be manipulated, exploited, or deceived in some way. So it's a lot of time that we spend on those phones, on our computers, or etc. The television, I guess, would have been an older source, not as much at the top of everyone's media diet any longer, but there's still quite a lot of television media consumption too. So before the era of television, if you go back to, let's say, like a World War II time period, 1940s, radio and television, radio and magazine were the main forms of mass media. Television was yet to become a staple of the American household until, the mid-1950s and beyond. But before that, it was mostly just TV and print. Sorry, I keep saying TV, but I intend to say radio. Before the 1950s, it was primarily radio and print media. Now, there's two different designations of media defined in our textbook. So they talk about mass media as opposed to niche media. So let me just quickly state those terms here. The only difference here between the two mentioned terms is the level of extent and reach that the media has in either case. So mass media is a form of communication that is intended to reach a large, either national or international audience. So I'm going to create a little additional space if you guys don't mind. I want to just not have to put that too tightly on the ledger. So reach a large national or international audience. And then that is just contrasted against niche media, which is more targeted to a specific target audience. So this is media or a form of communication that is geared to a narrower target audience. Intended to reach a narrower target audience. Okay, so mass media is just like the major mainstream media organizations. If you think of like CNN, Reuters, Associated Press, they're not like providing media information to a specific demographic or target audience. It's not like CNN is news for men or news for women or news for young people or old people. It's a broad scale in terms of the appeal that it's trying to make to a large audience. That's even internationally. But then there's niche media, which is directed at a more specific field of people. Like, there are television channels that are built just for sports and sports viewers, like ESPN. Or there are some that are just for shoppers, like QVC. There's internet media and marketing that is directed at just gamers, or just people that use specific types, that have specific types of hobbies or interests. So if you're reading a magazine about like Outdoorsman magazine, this is a niche media that is targeted towards a more narrow demographic audience than, let's say, the broad scale of the population. So sometimes when we navigate through the media, we're engaging with it in either of these two senses, and that's just something that's mentioned up at the top of chapter 11. Not a major complex idea, but just that there are more specifically targeted forms of media, narrower in their approach and extent, and that's compared against the big mass media. Now, by the year 1930, about 50%, half of the United States households did have a radio. And in the 30s and 40s, there were only a couple of radio networks that did everything when it came to the media. All the news, all the entertainment, all was found in just three big major networks. If you would want to, let's say, watch visual news, as we today just watch, the television or the internet, we like tune in and see the newscaster giving us the stories of the day. Before the advent of television, you would have had to go to these big movie theaters to watch newsreels with an audience of people. So that would have been the equivalent of visual news viewing prior to the advent of TV. You'd be in theaters watching newsreels. After World War II, we started to have televisions, and they started to be found more and more often in the average American household. But for many years, there were still just the three main TV stations that were branched from the original radio networks. So let me erase a little bit here. The big three media outlets for the entire original portion of time that the television existed was just ABC, NBC, and CBS. So, in the early history of television, you would have three media options, and you'd have these three different sources to choose from, which would have presented you with everything media-wise, whether it was news, whether it was entertainment, sports, gossip, or the weather, or anything else. Since those early days, the mass media has had a larger and larger influence on our everyday lives, and that brings us to today. So we're living in a media age today that is far beyond what any previous generation could have possibly experienced. Now, we don't just have 3 channels on the TV that we can sample from if we want to take in some information. Digital, cable, mobile, cell phone, the internet have all given us far greater media choices. And you can sort of self-select a media diet just based on the particular interests that you have. So it's become much more tailored to the individual's sensibilities and interests. Audiences are much more specialized and narrower because of the proliferation of these media options. The menu of options has grown, so people can specialize a little bit more in terms of what they consume. For example, QVC just for the shoppers, MTV just for maybe younger people that are listening to pop music. It also seems that there's this troubling trend that continues to grow with people selecting their media choices on the basis of their political ideology. And so probably a lot of you guys know that there are certain media outlets which seem to cater to the ideological or political assumptions of specific political groups. Like, so, I don't know, some people have argued that like MSNBC or NPR have like a liberal slant, or obviously like Fox News, Breitbart, have a conservative or right-wing kind of bent. If you had lived way back in the early days of media, then you wouldn't have been able to, let's say, go to the liberal or to the conservative media source to fill your mind with ideas that reinforce your preconceived notions, like with, let's say, confirmation bias. But today we certainly have that option, and it kind of leads to a somewhat disturbing trend of people no longer taking as credible media reports that come from alternative sources that don't align with their existing viewpoints. So you kind of have to sometimes take an extra effort to break out of the bubble that is created by only hearing an echo chamber of like-minded information. Sometimes, even if you don't necessarily agree with what other people think or say, it's worthwhile to at least investigate the media that is being served to them so that you can understand better how other people think and maybe just have an open mind about it too. But that's getting harder and harder because people can, of course, consume media that is self-selected to reflect their existing biases. There also is a somewhat disturbing trend of a few corporations consolidating control of the news media. And that's really accelerated just over the past, let's say, like 40 years. So in 1983, somewhat far back in the past, 37 years ago, there were 50 different companies that you could see dividing up the media landscape that people would then gain access to. But we see more and more consolidation of the media by a couple of big companies taking over more and more of the smaller ones. So by the turn of the last decade, around 2012, there's just a handful of companies that are providing all the information and so on that many, many more news corporations would have done in the past. So for example, by 2014, the media was controlled by 6 corporations, which include Time Warner, Disney, News Corp, that's Rupert Murdoch's corporation, Viacom, General Electric. And so when you have kind of corporate consolidation of the media, then sometimes that can control the quality and content of the media that's being provided to the viewer. For example, these big companies depend on advertising dollars to support their media broadcast rights. So if they didn't get advertising dollars, then they couldn't pay to occupy that time slot, let's say, on the television viewing schedule. But in order for them to attain those advertising dollars, they might not want to run stories that run contrary to the bottom line of the business. So like if you have a big corporate sponsor, Coca-Cola, are you really going to run that hard-hitting expose on your news hour about how like sugary drinks are promoting a spike in obesity and undermining public health, you might not want to do that because it could, undermine the profit motive of the advertiser that's paying for the station to run its airwaves. So sometimes corporate scandals and abuse are not as easily detected because there sometimes is a motive to prevent that from being information that undermines the profit motivation of the company. Another issue is that a lot of these big media corporations also donate to political campaigns, trying to influence the composition of our elected leadership in order to perhaps have a more favorable outcome for their business model. And you've got to worry, therefore, that news media can sometimes have bias in order to insulate them from the loss of advertising revenue, also to sometimes provide either implied or direct support for certain political figures that may serve their interests. So you're the consumer of all the media information, and you have to be a little bit wise to these facts before you uncritically assume that everything that you hear and read, etc., is an absolute fact. So as I read it here in the book, just a little bit of commentary on what I'm saying in person. So in addition to influencing the public through their productions, news media corporations also try to influence public policy directly by donating millions of dollars annually to congressional campaigns and tens of millions more to lobbying efforts. Television, radio, and wireless internet all rely on airwave radio frequencies to send and receive messages. Media lobbyists have tried to persuade Congress to privatize these airways, which are currently regulated by the government through the FCC. The pressure on the FCC has contributed to a trend toward government deregulation over the past few decades. So policy can actually be changed when a media organization uses lobbyists to win its argument in the halls of Congress. Sometimes that might not serve the public interest, and so we just have to be a little bit critical about those facts. It also interesting point that's mentioned here in the book, I'll just read this as I'm looking at it, the different media diet that younger people have as opposed to older generations. So I'm sure you guys can relate to this, but younger people, millennials, Gen Z, etc., 61% get all their news and media from the internet, and 37% watch television to get some of that. But the opposite is true for the baby boomer generation, who get most of their information from television news and less of it from the internet, although those numbers will change over time. So here's an interesting point to add to our little conversation about media that we're having today. It's a little bit more of an open-ended lecture. There's not a ton of like little bullet point definitions, but it's all useful for you as you contemplate how to construct your homework assignments. So just understand this is a little bit breezier, and there's not as much required content for you to like memorize, I should say. But when I put a term up there, I'd like you to remember it and be able to add it to your notes, and just also to have a fulsome understanding as we go through this topic in these chapters. So the influence of print media has declined a lot since the year 2000. It was getting up to a peak level at around the year 2000, but the influence and reach and consumer distribution of newspaper, magazine, and television has declined over 30% since the year 2000. And I wonder if you have an idea as to why print media is on the decline in terms of overall sales figures and viewership. It's evident, I think, to all of us, and it's because of the rise of the internet and the internet age. In this new 21st century, the internet has assumed a larger and larger role. So the taking in of information through the computer has become much more of a norm, and that has caused significant reorganization of the model of business that some traditional print media organizations, newspapers, and others were relying on. Also, today, people rely more on social media to get a lot of their information than had ever been the case before. Of course, social media is a relatively new phenomenon, dating back maybe around 15 years or so, for Facebook at least. That sometimes is disturbing, though, because the content is often, it's unregulated when it's put forward by people just posting, content online. So just getting all of your information from your social media feeds is sometimes unreliable because there's no vetting, there's no gatekeeping, and there's no controls as to the quality of the accuracy of the information. So sometimes false or unreliable claims can circulate quite fast through social media, and we have to be a little bit critical about it too. There were big labor costs of news reporting that have been, I guess, reduced because nowadays there's so many more people that also get their news from Twitter. A lot of times you can get information faster through, let's say, your Twitter feed than through the traditional mainstream media. But that has to be balanced against the awareness that sometimes when there's a rush to report on something or when it's being crowdsourced information, that it could be inaccurate and it has to be double checked later when more of the details come in. There also seems to be this other trend in our modern consumer culture away from hard news, like news about policy or about issues that affect our choices as individuals, consumers, and society. And their movement away from hard news like that to lifestyle, entertainment, sports, and gossip. So more and more people don't seem to want to look at, hard news, but rather just use news as a way to entertain themselves or to think about celebrities or sports leagues that they're a fan of. No real problem with that. I guess it's especially hard sometimes to watch the news nowadays with all the depressing stuff happening. But news is not just there for entertainment. So people should understand that when you watch news, it's not really a legitimate criticism to say, oh, but it's so sad, it's so depressing watching the news. Well, I mean, it's reality, it's not there to entertain you. If you want to be entertained, then there are other media options that don't have to do with reporting on facts. So interesting to point out that even though there's more news sources that you guys have access to today than any previous generation, because of the existence of the internet, social media, and so on, people are not generally more well-informed than previous generations were. So you'd think that with the, at the speed of light at your fingertips, you can look up anything in a Google search and get access to information very quickly. But that's also compensated for by the fact that people don't care maybe as much as they used to about informing themselves with the news. So that balance has to be struck, and over time, hopefully, we become judicious consumers of information. When news organizations and media do their oversight jobs well, then they can expose important corporate or government scandals. That's been seen over and over in history. Mentioned in the book a few cases. So as it says here, the expose of the Rockefeller oil monopoly by the journalist Ida Tarbell resulted in the federal investigation and Supreme Court breakup of the Standard Oil Company in 1911. Woodward and Bernstein of the Washington Post exposed the 1972 Watergate scandal, which led to the resignation of President Nixon back in 1974. So the news and its ability to report on and do investigative journalism that provides the public with detailed information about mismanagement by the government or corporations, that can be very important for us, and it can actually lead to big changes. But we also have to be in mind that there's sometimes the potential for false reporting. One source of false reporting can sometimes be the rush to be the first to get the scoop. If you ever notice, sometimes news organizations want to be the first one to report on something, but that rush to be the first sometimes undermines the accuracy of the eventual reporting. Like one example of that is that in the year 2000, when the presidential election was happening between Bush and Gore, everyone wanted to be the first to be able to call the winner. And once it looked like Gore had won Florida, there were some official calls being made by major media organizations that Gore was the winner of Florida and thus the presumptive winner of the election. But as we may know, further accounting of the votes established, I guess, that there was a recount that was necessary and that the totals were unclear. So perhaps in the rush to be the first to report, they got it wrong. Another famous example of this, I believe, is that when Truman went against Dewey way back in the earlier part of the 20th century, newspapers printed Dewey beats Truman, and there's a famous iconic photograph of Truman, who actually did end up being the winner after the full tabulation had been achieved, holding a copy of that newspaper, smiling because it's obviously false. So be a bit skeptical sometimes of initial reports. I've noticed that when there's like a mass casualty emergency, when there are these mass shootings that would happen a lot of the time, the number of shooters, the number of people dead, the motive, etc., would oftentimes be rushed to the press and would have to be later on corrected. So initial reports are sometimes not always the most accurate, and that means sometimes waiting to get the full picture can be better. So In the 1990s, the internet started to become a bigger staple of our media environment and everyday lives. And it really, really accelerated subsequently in the 2000s and to the current day. Use of the internet has more than tripled since the year 2000 if you consider the kind of prehistoric internet of the 1990s, very slow, those old dial-up modems. Today, there's so many people that are online, somewhere on the order of 3 billion. So it's important to our everyday lives, and we should know a little bit about its impact on daily life. So I wonder if you have a view about how many American high school seniors spend more time on social media than studying, because it's actually the norm. It seems like people can do anything online, whether it's shopping, dating, finding news information, engaging in hobbies, creating music or anything else. So because the internet has given us this tool to reach out to other people and to broadcast ourselves and to share at the speed of light, it's had this much, much larger influence over everyone's everyday life and routine. It gives us the ability to seek employment, information in the news, but it's also making the traditional print media obsolete. So we should be able to think critically about what we see, hear, and post on the internet. Facebook has billions of users. What percentage of college freshmen do you think are on some type of social media site? It's a very big number. It probably would not surprise you to learn that it's upwards of 94%. And 25% of the people your age, roughly college freshman age, will spend more than 6 hours on a social media site in a given week, looking at their notifications, chatting with people, reposting links, etc. It seems that some studies indicate it has an adverse influence on your grades and your performance academically, even though many people don't, I guess, believe that because they don't really alter their behavior. The textbook makes a point that you should be careful about the things that you post online, which I guess is a fair enough point. A lot of times people, if they want to post more controversial content, they'll create like a fake account or a username that can't be easily linked back to them. But you should always keep in mind not just the intended audience of anything that you say, but the unintended audience, whether that is like, authority figures, parents, teachers, employers. Not to say that you should feel muzzled or whatever on the internet, especially because we have a lot of public figures that feel quite free to say and do controversial things online. And I don't want to be a hypocrite because I feel free to sound off and express my own views in my social media behavior. But it's still mindful and well noted that you could get held to account for offensive or hateful speech or something that implicates you in either sexual or criminal misconduct of some kind. So always be wise to those facts. It's something you probably know, but it's never it can never be emphasized enough. The internet is called by some the great equalizer. It equalizes in the sense that it makes the discussion and the dissemination of information quite broad within the world. Everyone can log on and share ideas and put their views forward. So it kind of assists, in a way, the public dialogue that is so valuable to a healthy and thriving democracy. And it has had that effect in many democratic movements which have sought to overthrow existing tyrannical regimes, like in the Arab Spring in the earlier part of the 2010s. Social media was used as an organizing tool to help achieve those reforms. So it has a big political influence as well. Be aware, though, that sometimes claims you read online can be baseless and not verifiable with additional evidence. So always be willing to double check. Don't take the first claim that you read at face value. Be willing to seek out confirmation for it from other sources. And if you cannot find it, then it's worthy to remain skeptical. Be alert to the invasion of privacy, the potential to be harassed or to be exposed to fraud. We know that there are a lot of phishing attempts that happen, even with regard to just everyday email messages that show up in your inbox. So be careful on what you click and what you share. Talks a little bit about pornography, which it's kind of stunning to know that over 30% of all internet traffic has to do with the viewing of pornographic materials. I guess as adults, it's a person's business if they want to do that, but just know that if it's done in the wrong setting or if it could be attributable to you, you could get in trouble either at your work or school, obviously. So just be careful. And if you have kids that you're responsible for, then of course you'd probably want to institute some type of safety or security protocols so that if they gain access to the internet, that they don't go to sites you don't want. Even though it's quite hard to establish a firewall against that, because in many of these cases, they simply just ask a person that's online, are you 18? As though that's going to really forestall them from just clicking yes, even if they aren't. All right. Sometimes people use the internet to plagiarize their assignments. That's actually become increasingly common, and it's a concern in the academy and in higher education and college. It's definitely deceptive. It shows resistance to critical thinking. It shows an unwillingness to master the material without external aid. So you shouldn't do that, both for the sake of your own integrity, but also because it's dishonest and a violation of an institutional norm that's there for an important reason. So let's make sure that we develop what's called media literacy. So here's another little term mentioned in the book right now. Media literacy is simply defined in our text as the ability to understand and critically analyze the influence of media. To understand and critically analyze the influence of media. The influence and content of the media. Media literacy, knowing how to find reliable information on the internet, knowing how to distinguish true from false claims either on the internet or in other media sources that you engage with. It's actually quite important to be media literate, because if you're not, then you can easily be controlled by people that would like to, let's say, win your ideological support for an agenda that maybe that benefits them but not you. You don't want to be easily exploited in terms of buying products, goods, or services that are not in your best interest and that you might not have wanted if not for the clever attempts of marketing and advertising efforts to reach you. So you want to be in control of your own lives, basically. And media literacy allows you to do that and not to, let's say, become the subject of control by those that have other interests aside from your own. So it's mentioned at the tail of this chapter 11 review to sometimes use the three-tiered model of critical thinking when you engage with the media to develop media literacy. So remember the three levels of the critical thinking process. You have experience, interpretation, and analysis. So at the first level, be aware of how you experience the media. Know how much you use it and where you go. Ask who created the media information and why. Is it satirical? Is it hyperbolic? Or is it just factual and credible? Maybe note the message that is being conveyed by means of images or the appearance of the set, music that is sometimes used to instill a certain type of vibe or reaction to the content being stated or presented in the media. Note how much time is devoted to each different story or segment in a media viewing scenario. And pay attention to editing tactics that are sometimes used to shape the experience of the viewer, whether it's graphics, music, the quality or the nature of the set design. Take in all of those little details, and that's the experience stage. Next step, interpret. Make sense of what you're watching by asking what values or points are being expressed. Examine your own reaction. Are you resistant to the information being provided in the media? If so, why? Why do you have the reaction, whatever it is, if you could be a little bit self-analytic? Ask yourself, what does the reaction to the media that you're viewing or experiencing say about you? Does it exhibit or demonstrate confirmation bias? If so, try to mitigate that by taking in news from a variety of different sources, even those with which you may not initially agree. if for no other reason than to understand where other people are coming from and how they form their own opinions if you don't agree. That helps to prevent narrow-mindedness, and ask other people what their views are too, so that you can compare with others, the judgments that you each have, and see if that can shed any light. See if your analysis is rational or is it driven by emotion, and note any resistance you may have to other interpretations of the information that's given. Now, that's some stuff I told you about chapter 11, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about chapter 10, just a few points there. So let me go back to that really quick and cap off what we're doing today with some comments on chapter 10. So chapter 10 is more specifically focused on the topic of advertising, and that's really vital for your thought process as you develop your homework assignment due next Monday to me. You're going to go and find advertisements and try and find, examples of fallacies in them. So why are some companies so good at marketing and advertising? In this chapter 10 portion of the book, we're going to learn a little bit about marketing strategies and the critical thinking skills that are needed to do that well, but also not just to be a good marketer, but how to be a judicious consumer and to know when an advertising or marketing pitch is manipulative, misleading, or in some way ill-conceived. So there are three main purposes of advertisements, and I'll put those here. Okay, so one is to create product awareness. A second main function or purpose of advertising is to inform the consumer about the product or service. And then a third possible purpose of ads is to motivate or to stimulate customer demand. Okay, so we see advertisements which achieve any of these three different functions, and sometimes multiple of them at the same time. So for example, if you're like, driving around or whatever, and you see a big billboard and it just says Coca-Cola, and it's got the classic, cursive logo set against the red background. Now, that would be an example of the first. It's just to create product awareness. It's not saying anything about Coca-Cola. It's not saying, tastes great, less filling, or, it just says Coke. And that just reminds you that to be aware that the product exists. It's out there. It's something that exists. Remember this the next time you're out shopping or whatever, buying beverages. Now, a second purpose of ads would be to inform the consumer about the product or service. So not just say the name of it or the logo of it. Like if you just see a Nike swoosh, you're just remembering that product exists. But sometimes we see ads in a more traditional mode, which try to give reasons why you should buy the thing. So, it will say like, you're looking at an advertisement for like the new Nike shoe, and they tell you, okay, well, here's what's in the heel, and here's why that's conducive to being a better runner, and here's the reasons that if you buy this shoe, it's going to enhance your performance when you go out and run. Or, you watch a commercial for like a food product, and they say, here's why it's so good, because it's, hot and warm, and it's savory, and it's something that everyone would enjoy sitting around the dinner table. So sometimes the advertisement is just focusing on the quality of the product and service and why it would be suitable to some need that you might have. Okay. A third case is to motivate customer or consumer demand. So suppose that there's an advertisement which says, buy this box of cereal, and if you do, you have a small chance to win like a trip to, well, we're not taking trips anymore, but like a small like prize or whatever. You might win like a motorcycle. If you buy this, it'll enter you into a raffle. That's just trying to motivate demand for the product, but it's not really telling you why the product itself is good, nor is it merely just trying to create awareness. So ads have been and are created every day that are designed to appeal to us in one of these different ways. And they appear in many familiar settings. You see ads in physical space, emblazoned on billboards, Sometimes you see them on people's clothes. We're kind of walking advertisements when we have those logos embossed on the clothes that we wear. Of course, you're going to find them on the internet. You're going to see them on television and in the print media. So we're surrounded by ads all the time, constantly being appealed to by those that would like to sell us goods, services, and products. Now, by its very nature, an advertisement is an attempt at persuasion. It doesn't just say, hey, here's a product. I don't care if you buy it or not. It's trying to tell you, you ought to want to buy this thing. This is something that would be good for you, or it would be something that would suit your needs or your desires. So there's always an attempt to make an implied argument. Therefore, you can see every advertisement that is created as, in a way, making an argument with the conclusion, therefore, you should buy this product. And the premises are whatever reasons or information is given by the company that this is something you ought to buy, either because it's cool and it's in demand, or because the product itself is really useful to you, or simply that you remember it exists and then you'll divine some motives from that. So we're daily exposed to tons and tons of ads. Marketing research firms spend billions of dollars to identify the target audience of their product and then create ads and placement that is geared to them. So it's no, let's say, coincidence that, like, when you're watching, I don't know, like a sporting, event, then you're going to see advertisements that cater to the sensibility of those who they think would be the typical fan. So maybe they think if it's a hyper masculine type sport like football, they'll put ads that they think would appeal to a more masculine male sensibility. If you're watching a children's show, probably you don't watch too much, but if you did, and if it was, let's say, on television, then you'd notice that the commercials which appear in the intermissions are commercials for children's stuff, children's games, children's food products and stuff. And that's also completely intended because they know that that is the demographic likeliest to be watching this show. So they place advertising in the intermissions that's going to most likely lead to consumer purchases. How do they determine who the target audience is that's watching, let's say, the television broadcast? Well, there are Nielsen ratings, which sample the statistical distribution of who it is that's watching these different shows. And then the advertising companies gather that data and they use it to more effectively provide ads that will appeal and maximize the sale of a product to that kind of audience. So another important concept on the same topic of ads is what's called product placement. So I'm just going to mention that really briefly. Product placement. Okay, so product placement is just when the product is, when the advertisement is placed in the programming instead of during the intermissions. Okay, so in the programming itself, instead of during intermissions. Okay, so product placement. Maybe have you guys ever noticed that if you're watching like a movie sometimes, that in the film there will be a well-known consumer product that appears conspicuously in the film during the scenes that are being acted out. Now, that's never an accident or a coincidence. For example, for like Coca-Cola's logo to appear in such a film, there have to be complicated licensing agreements undertaken between the producers of the film and the product that's being advertised. They need rights to be able to do that, and then they form a contractual agreement to do so. Now, this is in a way a kind of clandestine attempt at advertising because it makes it so that you can't really avoid the ad. So if you're like me and you're not a big fan of watching ads that you don't choose to watch, then let's say when you're starting a YouTube video or something and they pop up, if you're like me, you skip as soon as you possibly can. And if you're like me and you're watching TV and you have to sit through a commercial break, you would change the channel to watch some other programs so that you don't have to view the commercials, or you'd at least mute them. That's kind of what I usually do. But one way that you can get around the viewer that does not want to be exposed to the ads is to simply put the material that you're trying to advertise in the programming itself. So like if I'm watching, you know, the new James Bond movie and he starts using an Apple laptop, it's not like I can say, well, I'm not going to watch this one scene because I don't want to see Apple advertising when I'm watching a movie. It's part of the movie. And it now serves as a little hidden ad within the film that induces the sale of the product. So we see that in a lot of different films, television, and sports. You know, any of you guys watching, let's say, I don't know, like NASCAR, you know, these cars driving around, they're embossed with a bunch of different corporate sponsors that pay so that they can afford, you know, the upkeep, maintenance, and et cetera of their, you know, very high-end race vehicles. If you're watching, let's say, football, sometimes emblazoned on the outer edge of the football stadium or arena, you're going to see all kinds of different corporate sponsors for the game. Here are some examples mentioned in the book. Let me just try and find those on page 315. Product placement. So ads may also be embedded in a television program. Product placement is an advertising strategy in which a real commercial product is used in media, and the presence of the product is a result of an economic exchange between the media company and the business that produces the product. Most product placements go unnoticed unless we make a conscious effort to notice them. Coca-Cola appeared on American Idol for years, one of the brands that was placed most frequently. Companies may also pay to have their logos used in a show. The logo for a sports apparel company like Nike may appear on sports uniforms and equipment in sports broadcasts. Automobile companies frequently use product placement. Product placement is caught on in movies. In the movie Transformers, every car was made by General Motors, and so on and so on. So additional examples are placed in that part of the textbook, just to kind of give you guys a little reinforcement on the current definition that we see here, product placement. It's kind of effective, right? Because you can't mute or change the channel if it's in the program itself. Okay, after that, it talks a little bit about television ads and little children. So children watch a lot of TV or internet. So in any case, there's a lot of digital media that is taken in by children. In fact, it's hours every single day. So it's not just, you know, teenagers and adults that spend a lot of time consuming media, but children as well. And since children are so young and inexperienced in the ways of the world, they're particularly vulnerable to clever marketing and advertising efforts. So the studies show that children actually watch a total of about 40,000 advertising and marketing impressions per year in a given calendar year, or something along the lines of 5 hours of that in a given week. And because they're so young and impressionable, these ads can be especially effective on them because they cannot identify the fallacious reasoning that is so often used. Now, what kind of advertisements are given for children? They oftentimes use little characters and stuff that appeal to children. So like Ronald McDonald, you know, is helping to get the child started early in life as a fan of McDonald's. All these breakfast companies, or I should say cereal companies that use like a cartoon mascot, are trying to, you know, get the early consumer locked into a pattern of consumption throughout their life that benefits the product that they distribute and sell. So if you're worried about kids, you know, being a little bit too given to certain products, then you might have to talk to them about these efforts that are being made to win their appeal toward the product. In other cases, you know, you kind of might have to balance that against some education you give them with regard to how to be a little bit more judicious media consumer. But obviously, it's a very effective method of getting a young person to want something. And a lot of times advertisers know that a child will bother their parents to buy a product if it looks cool enough or interesting enough to the childlike sensibility. So that's another attempt to drive sales. Now, of course, advertisements can and do play an important role. In the ideal theoretical sense, they inform us of products and services that we want to know about, but they can also manipulate us into buying things that we don't need and that we never would have wanted if it wasn't for the advertising itself. Sometimes ads manipulate us by appealing to our emotions, and sometimes they manipulate by utilizing fallacious rhetoric and fallacious arguments. So we have to be aware of how those tactics can be used so that we don't necessarily get tricked or deceived by them. Common fallacies that are found in ads. So this is directly relevant to the homework that you guys are going to do. They mention some of this, like for example on page 318, they go over a range of possible fallacies that you might see in a certain advertisement. For example, scare tactics. Okay, so here I'll read to you about their discussion of scare tactics. Many ads rely on fallacies and psychological persuasion rather than credible information and rational argument. Scare tactics, appeal to force, in other words, is used to create anxiety or play on our fears, insecurities, or sense of shame. We are told that we are not good looking or thin enough, that we have bad breath, body odor, or dandruff, that we have an unattractive personality or the wrong clothes, or that we are bad parents. The ad then promises a solution to the problem, which in some cases we didn't realize we had in the first place. So some ads use scare tactics to try and drive the sale. You see an advertisement with a person who speaks, and when they speak, their breath smells so bad that nobody wants to deal with them, and then they show, here's like a breath mint, that if they bite into it, now everyone likes them. So it's trying to drive the sale by the feeling of fear that the consumer might have if they are isolated or excluded in a social situation due to bad breath. Just one possible example. I've seen another advertisement that talked about, if you don't buy this type of insurance, here's what could happen. And they go into like some nightmare scenario where without the insurance that you could have bought, you're stranded with no help. So be careful to note that sometimes the scare tactic fallacy is used. There's also the fallacy of questionable cause, and it mentions that here. So some ads commit to the fallacy of questionable cause by creating a false expectation that something wonderful, such as becoming more beautiful, thinner, more popular, or happier, will result if we use the product. Okay, like you'll see advertisements for like a soda brand, whatever, Coca-Cola or something, and the person cracks into that soda, and all of a sudden it's a big party. Like everyone's having a great time, and everyone looks really good, and it's just they're having the time of their life, as if this was the thing that unlocked those unique and essential experiences. So anytime you see an ad like that, which promises a transformative or quick solution, but that's not grounded by very good argument or evidence, that could be questionable cause. Popular appeal, that's another one. The advertisement might make the case that everyone's using this, and you don't want to be the one like lame loser that doesn't use it, or they will depict the case of someone that didn't use the product in the advertisement and show them being socially excluded or something like that. It's mentioned here. Another common fallacy is popular appeal, creating the impression that everyone uses the product, so you should also. People have a strong drive to conform and be part of a group. This type of advertising is particularly effective with younger people and teenagers who tend to define themselves in terms of what their peers are doing. If everyone has an iPod or Nike shoes, then you should have them too. I don't know. So depending on the product and the nature of the ad, this could be another fallacy that is seen. A subcategory of the popular appeal fallacy is when it is the popularity of the person that is being used to underscore the argument that you ought to buy that product. But sometimes, the popularity of the person is irrelevant to the question of whether this is a good product or not. So if you just see a commercial with like, I don't know, LeBron James or somebody really well known and recognized in society, and the only reason that they're telling you to buy it is because this person's popular, that could be a popular appeal fallacy. Inappropriate appeal to authority. Sometimes you have people who are endorsing a product, and the advertisement just makes the case that that's why you should buy it. But the problem is that this person, even if they're someone that you've heard of, doesn't have any actual authority or expertise on the subject. I've seen advertisements where famous athletes are telling you what to do in terms of the clothes that you would wear or the car that you would drive. But this is not an automotive specialist, or let's say a designer of clothes. So you'd rather talk to someone who has expertise on those fields. The inappropriate appeal to authority could be another case of a fallacy here. Like, I don't know, George Foreman was well known as the product spokesman for these grills that could be used to make burgers and stuff. But they just attached him to the product because they knew of his popularity. It's not because he has any actual knowledge about cooking or nutrition or anything else. So inappropriate appeal to authority is also sometimes seen. Hasty generalization. A universal claim will be made based on an unrepresentative sample that is either too small or doesn't reflect the composition of the people that might use the product. So there'll be an ad that would say something along the lines of everybody's using this product because a couple of people are using it. And sometimes stereotypes will be used in advertisements that kind of are similar to committing the hasty generalization fallacy. Like women are stereotyped in the ad as sex objects or whatever. Men are stereotyped as like hypermasculine, pleasure-seeking people or whatever. So sometimes we have to be aware that the presentation of negative stereotypes can be affected by the way we take in media information, including through advertisements. Let's see, sometimes amphiboly is committed in these advertisements. So for example, what if the ad says lowest price on our website guaranteed? That's a little bit ambiguous. Does it mean lowest price that we have on our website is what we are guaranteeing? Or that the prices on our website are the lowest that you will find anywhere, and that is what we are guaranteeing? Just saying on our lowest prices on our website leaves the interpretation ambiguous between the two. And so that's another possibility of an amphiboly fallacy. Let's see. The naturalistic fallacy, that is quite widespread in the world of advertising. How often have you been at the grocery store and you see a label that's affixed to the consumable product which says natural or organic or something like that? You can even find like tobacco companies that advertise that we are using natural tobacco, as though that changes the carcinogenic properties that it does have, and the carcinogens in it can still cause the same kinds of diseases. So we shouldn't necessarily assume by means of some of these ads that whatever's natural is good or whatever's unnatural is bad. And that's a common fallacy that's seen in a lot of advertisements geared towards people that are trying to live in the way they think nature requires. Sometimes there's rhetorical devices and misleading language. Sometimes euphemisms are used to enhance the desirability of a product. So we've talked about this briefly before, but when you're advertising for your tiny house, you call it cozy. Or when you're advertising for your old car, you call it classic. Sometimes the euphemisms can then be used to shape the perspective of the consumer. Sometimes it's hyperbole. Sometimes they say this is must-see TV, or this is a revolution in your diet if you buy this, or something like that. And this hyperbolic language can sometimes enhance the desirability of the product to the consumer, but it's not always honest. Sometimes there's bad arguments and poor analogies. They mention in the book that, let's see, who made this case or this argument? Chevy had the product tagline, like a rock, when it comes to their trucks. But what they're trying to get you to think about is how a rock is stable, it's durable, it's sturdy. But a car is not relevantly similar to a rock in any other significant sense. It's not something that lasts forever. It does require maintenance. But by means of the bad or misplaced analogy, we gain an enhanced sense of its value beyond what's true. Sometimes hasty generalization is done from stats without information about how the sample was chosen. Like Tempur-Pedic said this. They said, 25,000 medical professionals have recommended our pillows. But how does it define the term medical professionals? Because there's some ambiguity there. Does it include only physicians and registered nurses? What if we also include chiropractors, massage therapists, nurses' aides, hospital orderlies? If we enlarge the size of the sample, then there are more than 700,000 physicians in that sense, and 2.8 million registered nurses. If we just included only those two groups, then 25,000 of them would represent 1% of the total. So it looks like a big number until you compare it to the larger sample size of the whole cohort. So obviously, in the end, what we can say is this. Advertisements and marketing materials can be critically viewed as harmful by using manipulative tactics that create markets for non-essential things that may divest us of our money that we would have better saved or kept for ourselves. Sometimes minorities and the poor are targeted by the clever efforts of advertisers. You might be surprised to know that in countries where there are more restrictions on tobacco sales, like in the United States, the tobacco companies simply ramp up their international marketing efforts in, let's say, more impoverished parts of the world where people might not have the same tools to critically assess whether the information is true. So those ads can sometimes harm. And a lot of times ads are trying to get you to purchase things that are actually directly not good for you. Like think of tobacco and alcohol advertisements. It's probably better for a person to never smoke or drink, but you wouldn't know that if you just watch these commercials. So do they have your best interest in mind when trying to get you to spend your hard-earned money on things that might be detrimental to your health? Who knows? Also, and this is a major point, the advertisements are expensive to produce, and they therefore increase the cost to the consumer of the product by 30 to 40%. So let's say you wanted to run an ad during the Super Bowl, which is like some of the most expensive advertising space to purchase. It costs millions of dollars just for a 30-second spot, right? Now, how are you going to pay for all the advertising costs? Well, you're not going to take a loss on your profits. What you're going to do is shift those costs down to the consumer. So we actually end up paying 30 to 40% more for most of these products than we would have had to pay if we didn't have to support so much of the advertising. And that's kind of ironic, right? It's like we're paying more for the products, and what are we paying for? We're buying more advertisements that will convince us to buy more of the products. If there were a little bit less advertising footprint in terms of the expenditure of the company, then a lot of these products would come down in overall costs and we would have fewer commercials. Also, the ability of big companies to have an advantage over small companies when it comes to advertising dollars and space makes it such that over time, small companies can no longer compete, and it contributes to the destruction and elimination of small and local businesses. So is like Joe's hardware store going to really be able to compete with Home Depot when it comes into town and consolidates the media environment and is buying advertisements on TV, internet, and radio? It's probably not going to be able to compete quite so easily. Sometimes you have a loyal local consumer base that can get us through those times, but particularly in the times we're in now, it's a lot harder for the small companies to compete. And if you want to have a robust free market, then you'd like there to be a competition between different companies, not just a few that consolidate control of the market and therefore can fix prices and gouge them. So that's the negative side, but you always want to be a critical thinker and see it from two angles. So I'll just close with this. Some people would reply against that by saying that as much as there can be these harms, the advertisements are just catering to our existing cultural values, and there are laws that prevent them from having outright false advertisements. So like if electrical store said, television's $5 today, come and get them. And then you showed up and they're like, look, we're just lying. We just wanted you to come in, but now that you are here, let's show you what our actual TVs are. They're pretty good, but they're nowhere near $5. That company would be sued and probably would lose really quickly due to false advertising. So there's a certain limit of how much information you can bend the truth, you can shape the perspective of the viewer, you can use all these different tactics, but you can't outright say something that's definitively false, because that could be a false advertising liability. So you might say that protects the consumer a little bit. You can also say that if the consumer ends up buying a product that they didn't need and that's not good for them, then it's maybe their fault. To the buyer beware is a famous phrase from Latin, translated as caveat emptor in Latin. To the buyer beware. You should just take it as a given that people want to exploit your wealth and take as much of it as they can. And if you are tricked by bad or weak arguments in an advertisement, then you should have just tried better to pay better attention. So some people would attribute most of the blame to any harm to the consumer that didn't, let's say, check against other available sources of information or other consumer reports. Basically, look, if you want to know if a restaurant's good, maybe you don't want to just take it from the restaurant themselves, because they're never going to criticize themselves. But we have all this crowdsourced information nowadays, right? You could just go on Yelp or something and see what 100 different reviewers have said. So you might say that we have the tools at our disposal nowadays between crowdsourced information online and consumer reports that are easily available, that we really bear the primary blame and responsibility for buying things that we don't really need. And you could argue that the harm to free speech would be greater if we wanted to crack down on advertisers that make sensational or unreliable claims. As bad as that may be, maybe that's the lesser of two evils. And what would be even worse is if we impose strict controls on them, because that would limit the free speech of the companies. And you might say that's the greater value to defend. You can also say that with regard to the concerns about consolidation of the market by a couple big companies, that's justified by free market principles, because they're just winning, and the winners win, and so they get more of the winnings. Some people would say that there's an unfair playing field. Other people would say that we're just choosing to gravitate more towards big box suppliers of goods. Also, because it's private advertising dollars that pays for our media, that ensures that we do not have a state-run media. And you might worry that the bigger concern than corporate corruption of the media would be state ownership and control over it, which could be, of course, a significant problem on its own. So wherever you stand, and I'm closing with this, wherever you stand on this sort of debate between the benefits and harms that are posed by advertising and marketing, it's mindful of you to keep these things in mind as you go through your consumer lives as citizens. So I will supplement today's lecture with some video clips that I'm going to send to you guys in a titanium message later tonight. And we will not have our Wednesday meeting this week because I'm substituting it with the videos that I will send. Next Monday, we will return to this live stream and start chapter 12. And between now and then, just watch those videos that I send and make sure to complete your third homework using the instructions I gave online. And if anyone has any questions about that or anything else, as always, do let me know, and I'm happy to help. So thank you guys for watching today. I had a lot to run through, but I hope that you got something out of it, and I hope you have a great day. So till next time, I'll see you guys then, and have a great Monday.